Hello, my name is Aaron Tyler, and this is the Old Testament Survey final presentation. I'm going to be talking about how the Old Testament can be divided up into, I would say, 5 different categories that will help you know what you're reading and help break it up into different sections that kind of divide what the books are about. That would be the Torah, historical books, poetry and wisdom, major prophets, minor prophets, and I'll have a few concluding thoughts. So up first is the Torah. That would be the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. This gives the history from creation all the way to Israelites entering the Promised Land. And these books really give the law given by God to the Israelites, how they're supposed to live, how they're supposed to interact with each other, how is life supposed to be, what you're supposed to do in different situations, and different things like that. That transitions right into the next section. There'll be historical books: Joshua, Judges, Ruth, First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. These cover the Israelites in the Promised Land in Canaan, all the way up to the exile in Babylon. It encapsulates all the different kings that Israel and Judah had, different rulers, and different battles with neighboring nations, as well as just the history of the people leading up to the exile. A lot of overarching theme is with the kings, that the Israel wanted to have a king and a ruler, and you'll find that a lot of them did not follow God's law and commands, and you'll see the consequences that came about because they were not faithful to God's law. After that, you have poetry and wisdom. This would be Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. These books really kind of go into the human experience and emotions, wisdom on how to live, and they really show that God is faithful. And for example, like Job and Psalms really kind of go into human experience. Not saying the other ones don't, but like for example, like Job is all about his life and how he was tested and everything was taken away from him, but then God restored everything. So it's really powerful knowing that God is faithful, and it talks about, gives his life as an example for that. Psalms is how you can cry out to God in times of trouble, praise him in the good times and the bad times. You have Proverbs, where you can get wisdom on how to live. And so these books really help with that, and they're written in a way that's kind of like, it's called poetry because it's very poetic, and they're obviously got Songs of Solomon. Psalms is songs written by David during his life. After that, you have major prophets: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Daniel. These show God's warning to turning away from him and what happens. A lot of these prophets were going to the kings of the time and warning them about what they're doing and how they're going away from God and the consequences that are going to happen because of their decisions. The major prophets is also where you'll find many prophecies about Jesus. A lot of Daniel, Isaiah, for example, and Jeremiah, those have a lot of prophecies about Jesus. And so that's where you can find those. By major prophets, I don't mean that there are other prophets in the Old Testament. We'll get to those in a second, but it's major and minor. That's not necessarily saying that one's better than the other. Major is mainly because these books are larger significantly from the other prophets, usually have a larger theme and focus, whereas, as we'll find out in the minor prophets, those are more specific to a specific situation or time. And so, speaking of which, the minor prophets, that's all the last 12 books of the Bible: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. These end the Old Testament and are considered minor because of their length, not that they're minor comparison. But these are also people that had a message from God to a people, to Israel, to neighboring nation. And it's usually one specific event, theme, situation that's happening that are written in those books. And so that would conclude the Old Testament. So so once it concludes with Malachi, then we have that 400 years of silence until the New Testament was written. These groupings help you understand the Old Testament and what you're reading, how to break it up, the style of the book that was written, and finally, as a final thought, the Old Testament should still be studied and not ignored just because it's the Old Covenant and Old Testament. It should not be ignored. It should still be studied as a way to help us live and know God's character and who He is. So that's the Old Testament survey. Thank you for listening.